Hi everyone, I am Kristen Anderson, Information Desk Clerk at McCracken County Public Library and moderator of the Happily Ever After Romance Book Club. And we're back with another Conversations with a Writer with my fabulous co-host, Tammy Blackwell, who is the director at Marshall County Library and a best-selling author. And today we are going to talk about consent, how it's written in romance novels, how do we like how it's written, what things we wish were different, and how it's come in the history of romance, actually, how it's come forward a long way. Before we get started, a couple of disclaimers. One, the opinions Tammy and I express are our own. They do not necessarily represent those of the libraries for which we work. And today's conversation, it won't get explicit, but it is adult themes, adult content. So it's a little PG-13, although I really doubt kids are clamoring to watch this. I wanted to make the disclaimer anyway. So Tammy, this is a topic that you came to me about, you want to talk about today, consent. So why do you think it's important, and how do you want to lead off today?
Well, I think consent in general is becoming more talked about in our culture since the Me Too movement several years ago. It has been a conversation in romance land, though, for longer than that. That it was already a conversation there. And I just personally have noticed a big shift, probably in the last 10 years or so, in how certain scenes are written and adding in that level of consent. I mean, we've gone from those alpha male books where there was no consent, to now where, you have scenes where it's like every step of the way checking in. And I just think that that's really important movement for not just the romance genre, but our society as a whole. Okay. I think it's really reflective.
Yeah. And I've noticed that too. I did a little reading last night on consent, and you've got those historical romances from the early romance publishing, and where the women are abducted and they're basically, raped, for lack of a better word, and then that is the word.
That is.
And then they marry their rapist, and it's a love story.
Yeah. It's like, I can't read ones written before, like, I don't know, the late 90s, early 2000s, because that really was a big thing, especially with historicals.
Yes.
Because they were going with that whole, like, Victorian era virginal, and, and that was the only way that they could add in, they felt, the steamier scenes. And so it's upsetting, especially with modern sensibilities. But I can't imagine that it wasn't upsetting to a big portion of people even then.
Yeah, because you're right. We have, especially in Victorian times, virginity was prized. And not only that, women weren't supposed to enjoy the act. It was just to make children, and that was it. And
lay back and think of England.
Yeah. So if you're trying to stay true to that, you can't, I guess the feeling was, you can't write it as she was wanting it, because that's not how women were perceived then,
right.
Which was wrong, of course. So and then you've got a conundrum. You've got, you want these two to want it together and it to be a big love and not a marriage of convenience, not an arranged marriage. You want it to be a marriage of love. You want that happily ever after. But how do you write your steam if the woman isn't supposed to want that? You know?
Yeah. It's just, and I think that may be where some of the disdain for the romance genre comes from initially anyway. It was not a feminist genre in the beginning at all.
Yeah.
It very much painted women in this damsel in distress role.
Yes, very much.
But that's not where we are now. Now I would say that by and large, romance is a feminist genre. It gives the power to the woman. And so yeah, but back in the day, it was not cool.
And especially if it was written by women. And the thing I've noticed now, especially with romance writers, is they are very loud about protecting their genre. They're very loud about what they will and won't accept as far as people looking down on romance novels. Romance is a $1.6 billion industry. In a lot of cases, it's keeping the publishing house afloat. And they don't want to admit that because in their minds it's still a women's genre. And so you got to get a little patriarchy in there too, as far as how it's perceived, and in some cases what they will publish. I mean, maybe the woman wanted to write something that was a little more modern and was batted back by a publisher thinking no one would want to read that.
Exactly, yes. And I mean, the internet has changed so much because we're able to connect with other writers and other thoughts and other, you know what I'm saying, and kind of almost unionize, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like, no, this is what we're going to do. If you want to publish romance, this is how we're going to do it. But I do imagine, you know, especially when we're talking like the 70s, 80s, I would imagine most of those houses were run by men. Most of the acquisitions were being done by men, and they had a certain way they wanted that to be seen. And so I can see that would have played majorly into what was actually being published.
Now, one of my problems with how consent is occasionally written, and you touched on it slightly earlier, you mentioned the alpha male trope, which is not... I've read a lot of alpha male books. I enjoyed probably about 60% of them. But then you get that alpha male where the way they're written is they don't listen to anything the woman tells them because they are the man and I'm strong and I'm being protective and it's written as okay. What I was getting at with that is a lot of the consent is in her head.
Yes.
It's not something that she's explicitly, you know, my least favorite is when she's like, well, she says no, and he says, you don't mean no. And in her head, she's like, well, I really don't mean no. And so they consummate or whatever, and it's like, but you didn't listen to what actually came out of her mouth.
Yes. Yes. I actually wrote down one example. The Dream Man series by Kristen Ashley.
How did you know I was thinking about that? How did you know?
I've only read the first one in the series, Mystery Man, because I was so livid throughout the entire thing. Because she kept telling him, like, do not come into my house again. And he would literally break into her house and get into her bed while she was asleep. And she would wake up beside him. And I'm like, no, that is wrong. I mean, it was just so upsetting to me. And like you said, there was some form of consent in her head. Like she'd wake up and be like, oh, he's here. I'm so happy. But no, she had told him not to do that.
Right.
So he should not have. And so, I mean, I had enjoyed the series before that. I forget what, Rock Chicks.
I love the Rock Chicks.
Yeah, I mean, and those were all alpha males. And there were maybe some moments in that I'd be like, eh. But ultimately, there was always consent, or at least not to the level of no consent that there was in that book. And I was done. I was like, I can't read anything else in this series because that is so upsetting to me that he literally didn't listen at all. And I don't understand, honestly, why anybody would read that and be like, yeah, that's cool. She told him no and he broke into her house. I'm like, don't break in my house.
I will say I read Dream Man and I had the same issues, but I liked the way it ended. The second book in the series, Motorcycle Man, is probably my favorite because he actually listened. He was this big, strong leader of a motorcycle club, and he listened when she, to the woman that he wanted. The third book I actually don't think I ever finished it for the same. It was a more of the, she said, no, I don't want to do this. Sure, you want to do this. Well, and I'm like, no.
Yeah.
Just listen to the first answer and we're done.
Done, yes.
Yeah. And I don't like implied, bless you, not implied consent. I don't like where the consent, he doesn't hear it.
Right.
Because that's not consent to me. What about you?
Yeah, I think, and I mean, I think that's where we've run into problems as a society is people misunderstanding possibly, you know, what they're thinking of nonverbal cues, you know?
Yes.
Like, I feel like, you know, that a lot of times we, you know, that's possibly where we've gotten into some trouble is that we have these stories. We have these, it's in movies and everything else where that seems to be the norm, that she pushes away, but she really wants it. And so people kind of internalize that that's how it's supposed to work.
Mm-hmm.
And they think, oh, well, you know, she was saying no, but her body actions were saying yes. And I think that's one of the really important things that we're doing with romance novels is for people who read those and that have these levels of consent. Like, maybe it was considered non-sexy before to be like, is this okay? Is this okay? Is this okay? But the way they're written, I mean, they're still very sexy scenes. They're very steamy, but they have that literal out loud, is this okay?
Yeah.
Before moving forward with even something new within what they're doing.
And while the one thing that popped into my head was a song that is absolutely one of my favorite songs. I'll admit it. Robin Thicke's "Blurred Lines," where the whole chorus is, "I know you want it."
Yeah. Yeah.
And I was like, but I love that song, but it is very rapey.
Yeah.
So, you know,
yeah, it's you know, it's one of those you're like, whoa, no. And again, looking through things through a lens now where we have as a society educated ourselves a little more about consent and things like that. There's a lot of songs and stuff you'll look back on and be like, oh, that wasn't cool.
like The Police, "Every Breath You Take," which is an ode to stalking, basically.
Yeah, it's like, hey, I'm just gonna follow you around and you're not gonna know I'm here, it's fine.
It's great. You secretly love me.
Yeah, there's, you know, there's a lot of songs you listen to now, or, you know, you'll go back and you'll watch a show from, you know, when we were younger or something like that, and you'll be like, oh, that did not age well.
Yes. In recent years, there has been a lot of talk about the Christmas classic, "Baby, It's Cold Outside."
Oh, yeah.
Because, you know, she's like, I really, you know, I shouldn't stay. And he's like, oh, but it's cold. Stay with me. And I like the song, and I'll just be, you know, belching away. But I can see, I can see where they're coming from with the criticism.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes. Because that whole song, I mean, it's like, you know, he's pouring her another drink.
Yeah, and she's already said she thinks she's had too many. Oh, well, have a third, and you know.
Yeah. I mean, it's seriously, it's not great when it comes to consent.
Yeah.
You know, and I think I've actually had that conversation with my girls before, like listening to the song and be like, hey guys, this is a great song, but if you tell a guy that you're ready to go and he doesn't let you leave, you punch him in the nose and call me and I'm coming. You know, like. You're getting out of there. Don't you let him do this to you. So,
I think it is also telling that we do enjoy the music, and it's still how much of that is instilling that incorrect norms of consent in our heads.
Yes.
There's a song I used. My mom would listen to my mom's, and I know we're supposed to be about books, but this ties into the whole conversation. Overall conversation. There's this song I love. I think it's by maybe the Pretenders. I can't think of the book. Can't think of the group name, but the song is called "Pay to the Piper," and he's basically telling her, "We went out. I bought you dinner, we went to a movie, now it's time for you to pay up. And let me tell, and I mean, the chorus is, if you dance to the music, you got to pay to the piper. And that came on satellite radio there, and I'm just singing away, if you dance to the music. And I was like, oh, that's awful.
Yeah. Yes. And I mean, it's hard to give up things that you've enjoyed,
Yeah.
like, I mean, I will probably always listen to Maybe It's Cold Outside, even knowing that it's not the best message. And I'm sure there's some people, especially those that have been reading romance for a long time, that they still enjoy that trope.
Yeah.
And they don't want, they'll continue to enjoy that trope, maybe even realizing that it's somewhat problematic.
Yeah.
There are, some alpha male books that I really enjoy, that don't necessarily go as far as that, Dream Man series, but I still enjoy them, even knowing that, okay, he's being a little high-handed. In real life, I would not like this guy at all.
Right.
But in this book, it works for me.
Yeah. We've talked about some series that don't do consent well. I found a list of some books. Oh, actually, before we get into that, something that brought this really, I thought, to the forefront late last year was the release of Netflix's Bridgerton series. Series 1, where the Duke of Hastings has stated his desire not to have children. So he was using, honestly, some of the worst form of birth control in the world, but whatever. It's what they had.
It's what they had.
It's what he had to go with. And there is a scene where instead of
she kept going
beyond
when he had said no.
He had said no.
Yes. And honestly, that was in the book. It's even worse.
It's worse in the book than it was in the past.
Yes.
I thought the same. I watched the series first and then read the book, and I was like, oh, this is worse.
Yes, it was much worse in the book. And again, that first Bridgerton book came out in the 90s, I believe. This is still when, it was not until probably 2010 or so that you really see that big shift towards more consent. But I will say, I think that's probably the only instance in that entire series that's like that.
Yes, I'll agree.
But yeah, I mean, consent's a two-way street. I think that's important to know too.
Yes, we've been talking a lot about the female consent. Right. There's male consent as well.
There is male consent as well, and I think normalizing talking about that is important too. But yes, there was a lot, and I think a lot of the talk about that, some people were watching that scene saying, I'm not really sure, but a lot of that talk was from people who had read the book too. And some of those hadn't read the book in a long time, and that reminded them, and they were like, oh, now that I think about it, that was really awful.
Yeah.
Like, that was really not cool at all.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's kind of good that it was in there that we did have that conversation, I think.
Yes.
Again, as a society, we opened up and started talking more about consent and from the male point of view.
Yeah, because we tend to not think that they need to consent to anything. That men are always ready to go regardless.
Right,
and they don't really need a choice or anything, and that's not right.
No.
If we're wanting our choices and thoughts to be respected, the same on the male side as well.
Exactly, and I think there's an even stronger stigma about guys talking about that.
Yeah.
Than even women, and we talk all the time about how hard it is for women to speak up about such things. But it's even harder for men, and again, there's that normalizing factor.
Yeah. Where I was going earlier before I got off on my Bridgerton train, I did find a list online. There's an article online. I think it was a Glamour link actually, that said, what are books that handle consent well? And one of the books that they mentioned is by an author I believe you enjoy, Courtney Milan. And I did not write down the name of the book. It'll come to me eventually. But where it was a historical romance, and it was a scene where he gave her bobby pins and said, when you want me to do something, hand me a pen, and that is your consent. You know, that's, you're telling me it's okay. If you don't hand me a pen, I'm not doing it.
Yeah. And I, you know, and I've sat down and kind of went through who I thought really did consent well.
Mm-hmm.
And I often find that it is our BIPOC authors. And probably because race plays into consent a lot in things other than sexual stuff. You know,
Right.
like I think possibly those populations maybe are more aware of consent, or I'm not sure, but it does seem like to me personally, when I was going through my authors that really do that, I was thinking of Alicia Ray, and I was thinking of Courtney Milan, and I would, you know, the ones that I really was coming up with was all non-white authors.
It's funny you say that. They had a comment section, you know, comment on books that you think did it well. And the ones that I all wrote down except one were authors of color. Helen Huang, who wrote the Kiss Quotient series.
Yes.
Alyssa Cole. Talia Hibbert.
Yes.
And then Courtney Milan.
Yeah.
And the other was Susan Elizabeth Phillips, and I'll get into that in a second. But I think you're right. There's so many things, if you are a person of color, that you don't honestly get asked for consent. I think they're more conscious about putting that in their writing.
I think so too. You know, you know, that's just the names that keep popping out to me when I think about it. And, you know, it's just interesting, you know, I really think somebody working on maybe a sociology doctorate or something really should delve into that a whole lot, because it did. Those were the names that just really kept coming out to me. And the other one was Chloe Leese.
Yeah.
Her most recent book, that With You Forever.
Yes.
I mean, that was probably the most perfect example of consent I have ever seen.
Yeah.
Throughout the entire book, and it was still steamy and romantic and wonderful. But also, she also writes a lot about person with different disabilities, and so that's another population that again doesn't get asked for consent often.
True. Very true.
So, you know, I think that probably also plays into her mindset on that. Again, I don't know nothing about her person. Don't know nothing. I know nothing about her personally.
I don't either. But she tackles these so well. You're like, there's got to be someone in her life,
right? Yes.
or maybe her herself, that has dealt with some of these issues, because she does tackle them really well.
Very well.
Yeah.
So yeah, and I mean, again, that was probably like, I remember reading the whole way I'm reading that book. I was like, oh man, this is great consent. Like every step of the way, both of them were checking in with each other.
Yes.
It was just lovely.
Yeah, she does write, and writes. I won't gush about her any longer, but she does write.
She is great.
Great characters, really good.
We both highly recommend.
We do. Susan Elizabeth Phillips had a book in her Chicago Star series. It Had to Be You. Phoebe Calabo. Well, she wasn't Calabo then. She was Somerville, maybe. But anyway, she had been attacked in the past. She had been raped in the past. And she starts up with the football coach of her team, big brawny guy. And he said, anytime you want me to stop, I will. And she didn't quite believe him. But she was like, okay. And so she kept testing it, I think. Stop. And at one point, she asked him to stop at a point where she thought it'd be too late. But she wanted to see what would happen. And he stopped. And she was like, that kind of changed the course of her relationship, because it made her realize he was listening. And for me, it's a big brawny he was a former football player, he's a coach, and you don't really think alpha male, that's what you think. And it's like, they don't always, an alpha male can also consent.
Yes.
Can also listen to the woman he's with.
Exactly. Yeah. Yes. And, I would say that makes him more of a man, that he can um, take, his own urges and push
Yeah.
them away and do what's best for someone else.
Yeah.
But yeah, and I think that's where I see consent a lot in romance novels lately, is that they will get to this point and the guy will step back.
Yeah.
Where, you know what I'm saying? Like,
Mm-hmm.
oh, I'm not sure you're ready. I'm not, I don't want things to go too far. And, and then the woman gives her, no, I want to go further. No, don't stop. No.
And it's verbal.
Yes.
Not
yes.
just
Not
in her
just
head.
in her head.
Yeah.
Yeah. Not just so the reader and her knows.
Right.
The dude in the story knows as well.
Yeah. I think that's important. Where do you think we are going with this as far as in the future, romance novels of the future?
I mean, I would think that this is here to stay, and I think you're always going to have, authors that write other stuff,
Yeah.
Gosh, I can't even remember how many romance novels are written a year.
A lot.
A lot. I mean,
lot.
so, but even if it was just 1,000, which is probably how many's published a week, all 1,000 of them are not going to have great examples of consent.
Right.
There's no way. But I do think that, especially, your big writers, I think of, Sarah McLean is probably one of the biggest romance writers
Mhm.
right now. She does great with consent.
Yeah. So does Tessa Dare.
Tessa Dare, yes, does great with consent. So I really think the trend, what you're going to see most now is going to be consent, and I don't think that'll go away. And I think we will have another surge at some point of alpha males.
Yeah.
And it's going to look different than it looked before.
I really hope so. As I like the alpha male trope. I'm fine with it, but at some point when I'm reading it, it's coming less across protective, and it veers into overbearing.
Right.
And I cannot stand overbearing.
Exactly. And I mean, there's certain genres that kind of demand that the male be very strong, and when you're talking about your suspense romance,
Yeah.
a lot of your paranormal romance, because you're in these situations. I mean, that's the whole point, that you're in these like literal life and death situations, and you need somebody strong, but you can be that and still be emotionally more mature.
Yes.
That does not, just because you can like deadlift a semi truck does not mean that you can't, have some feelings.
Yeah. Have some depth.
I mean, Roy Kent is a great example. I know we're going into TV here, but
We talked about music. Why not TV?
well, and why not bring in Roy Kent to
Why
every
not talk about Roy
conversation
Kent?
that one has? If you have not watched Ted Lasso, I highly recommend
It
it.
is good. It is very good.
And Roy Kent is very much an alpha male. He literally growls all the time. He's, but when it comes to relationships,
He's great.
he is like the most awesome human being. When he told Rebecca that she deserved somebody who was great,
Yeah.
he has this great emotional bandwidth, even though, he's very growly and football player,
Yeah. Very much so.
I think he's a great example of that, how we can, in the future, look at alpha males.
Yeah. His relationship with his niece is absolutely top notch. It's top notch.
It is. And I mean, that he's played by Brett Goldstein, who I absolutely love because, he's one of the writers on the show.
He is.
So, I mean, if the show is so well written. And also, he is like obsessed with the Muppets. And how do you not adore a man who's obsessed with the Muppets?
I love Muppets.
So if you'll YouTube it, he does an entire one-man show of the Muppets Christmas Carol.
Really? I have not seen that.
It's fantastic. He's a lovely human being, but yeah, when it comes to alpha males, now my gold standard is Roy Kent.
Okay. someone who could use a lesson in consent, Miss Piggy.
Exactly. That's true, though. She really could. I mean, bless her heart. She really needs a lesson there.
She does, and we allow it, but and these, it's geared toward kids. I won't get into that, but something to think about.
Something
definitely
in fact,
to think about. Yeah.
And remembering that character was built in the 1970s again. Like we've come a long way, baby.
We have, and I think we still have a little way to go.
Oh, we got some. Yeah.
Yeah. Do you have any final words on consent?
Just that I'm glad to see us moving in that direction, and I really do think that art, and I do believe romance novels are a form of art, really can influence how we behave as a society. And I hope that that's what happens, is that the more consent is written into romance novels, the more we see people demanding that level of respect and that level of consent in real life.
Yes, on all things.
On all
Not
things.
Just, yes.
Exactly.
On all things. Oh, hey, we're right around 30 minutes, which is really good for us.
That is so good for us.
Before we close, any recommendations, either on consent or just in general?
I do want to, I know we've recommended this before, but that Bergman Brothers series, if you're looking for consent, Alicia Ray, again, the Forbidden Heart series.
Okay.
That's a really good one. And then, I cannot think of her name, but wrote the Brown Sisters.
Talia Hibbert.
Yes.
The Brown Sisters
are
really
good when it comes to consent as well.
I'll agree. I also throw in Helen Huang. We mentioned her earlier. The Kiss Quotient or series. I don't know if that's what it's called. I don't know. It's Kiss Quotient, Bride Test, Heart Principle. All of them are really good. Consent. Alyssa Cole has a Princess series that is really good. And Susan Elizabeth Phillips, her Chicago Star series, at least the first 6 are really good. And a lot of them have some consent that's handled, I think, really well. So yeah, that's some recommendations for you on those along those lines. And I guess we can close out this edition of Conversation with a Writer. Once again, I want to thank you, Miss Tammy Blackwell, for coming all the way from Marshall County to sit and chat with me. And so this is Tammy. I'm Kristen. Thank you very much for watching, and we'll see you again.